Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and today we're going to do a follow up to Wednesday's episode. And that is not Wednesday the day, that is Wednesday and her survivor story that just came out. And this is going to be an educational follow up based upon everything that we heard in that episode. And I'll be giving you a summary, key themes, an analogy of that episode. And then we're going to point out the fear, obligation, guilt, and shame that occurred for Wednesday during her story, during her life as a whole, as well as things we want for Wednesday and things she plans on working on. And before we get to that, if you want to be a guest like Wednesday was the other day, then go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com. Inside, you'll see that we have a guest form. Click on that guest form button, fill out the form, or just send us an email at narcissistapocalypse@pm.me. And also, we have a newsletter, and our newsletter has 5 things inside. Actually, it's 6 things inside. The 5 things are kind of 5 points we want to hammer home from this episode that we will not be discussing today, and some resources in there as well. And the 6th thing will be a downloadable workbook from this episode. So if you want any of that, it's all for free. Go to our website, sign up to our newsletter, and hope to hear from you today. So today we're going to be talking about Wednesday's story, and Wednesday shared her experience as a survivor of abuse, intergenerational trauma, and grooming at the hands of her college professor. And from a young age, Wednesday struggled with family boundary violations, emotional neglect, and people pleasing, which really primed her for the manipulation that occurred later on in her life. And we're not going to be victim blaming here. We're not excusing, that someone can come into these things without any issues, but Wednesday did. And when Wednesday entered college, her professor persistently groomed her, leveraging her vulnerabilities and drawing her in with love bombing, excessive attention, and just, manipulation behind the scenes, in front of her and behind the scenes. And as this relationship escalated, Wednesday endured gaslighting, rage, sexual coercion, and just a real big erosion of self-worth, and a lot of self-blame was going on. And the big key themes to this episode are grooming and manipulation by authority figures, childhood trauma and boundary violations, people-pleasing and low self-esteem, gaslighting and emotional control, sexual coercion and assault, and struggling with self-blame and shame, and then trying to break the cycle and healing everything. And that includes kind of trying to fix your boundaries. And now I'm going to give you an analogy for Wednesday's story. And this analogy isn't just what happened in the relationship, but it's also what we want for Wednesday in the aftermath as well. So this is our analogy, and hopefully you enjoy this one. Who knows if every week they're going to kind of be similar, but we will see. Imagine life as a garden. Ideally, each person has their own plot to plant, nurture, and watch grow. And you decide what seeds go in the soil, what flowers bloom, and when to pull up weeds. But for Wednesday, it was as if she entered her garden only to find other people, family, partners, even authority figures, telling her what to plant and trampling over her flowers and insisting the garden belonged to them. One even sneaked in through a hidden gate, showering the garden with fertilizer and sunshine, making it seem safe and special, while quietly planting weeds that choked out her own flowers. Over time, Wednesday forgot that the garden even belonged to her. She followed others' instructions, growing what she was told, blaming herself when things didn't bloom. Eventually, she began to notice the weeds, the smothering vines of guilt and self-doubt and control. She realized she was tiptoeing in her own garden, afraid to stand her ground for fear the sun would hide or the gate would slam shut. However, with some supportive help, Wednesday started reclaiming her garden. She recognized which plants were her own, learned that it was okay to pull out weeds, even if others told them that they were flowers, and began to trust her instincts about what belonged there. And I guess the big lesson here is that if someone tells you that the garden you're standing in isn't yours or shames you for the way you care for it, remember, your garden, your rules, trust your gut, ask for help when you need it, and don't be afraid to say no to tramplers, even if they say they're just passing through. Healing is planting new seeds, and sometimes it's messy, but with time and the right tools, you'll see your own flowers bloom again. And I hope you like that analogy. That one was for Wednesday. A lot of you could have taken something from that. And up next, we are going to be discussing the fog, the fear, obligation, and guilt. And we put shame with guilt as well. And some of these things were created in Wednesday's household growing up, and some of these things were in the relationship. So for fear, we'll start off with fear. So throughout her life and the abusive relationship described by Wednesday, a multitude of fears were created and reinforced, both by the perpetrator and by the dynamics that were around her. And here is a summary of a bunch of those main fears. So number one on our list is fear of setting boundaries and speaking up. So Wednesday repeatedly mentioned being afraid to express discomfort or assert boundaries, stemming partly from her upbringing where she was taught to comply and not to trust her instincts. And experiences with her mother and her uncle conditioned her to suppress her own needs, and she carried that into her relationships and with the relationship previous to the college professor and with the college professor as well. And then fear number two was the fear of conflict and rage. And early in this relationship, whenever Wednesday tried to communicate or make choices, the abuser would either rage at her or turn her issues against her, leading to a fear that expressing herself would result in emotional explosions or punishments. And I know a lot of you out there probably have dealt with that one. And number three is fear of repeating family trauma. And this one will cross combined with shame as well. We'll probably mention it there as well. And as a child of divorce, Wednesday felt obligated to make her adult relationship work, even when it was unhealthy, in order to avoid what she saw as her parents' failure. So there's a little bit of shame in there as well, and it is a big fear for her. And a lot of people we hear are staying in relationships out of this shame as well and out of this fear as well. They don't want to see themselves as a failure. We hear it on the show all the time. Number four on the list is fear of abandonment and not being loved. So from childhood, Wednesday wondered if anyone would miss her if she was gone. And this sense of emotional neglect was reinforced by the abuser's controlling behavior, making her believe that she had no one else and she was really tying her value to that attention. So there was this fear of abandonment and not being loved. And a lot of people who listen to the show have that as well. And then number five is fear of isolation and having nowhere to go. And this one is a combination as well with obligation. We'll put this one in obligation as well. We'll mention it there. And for this one, the abuser in Wednesday's life directly threatened her with destitution if she tried to leave, saying you won't be able to find an apartment and you're going to end up on the street and starving. And this is really instilling a fear around escaping and independence for Wednesday and for many people that have been a guest on our show and for many of you out there too. And number six on our list of fears, and our last fear on this list, is fear that seeking help would backfire. And when trying to leave or get help, Wednesday feared retaliation, being disbelieved. Like, will the police believe me? Will everyone believe me? She said that the police have a bad reputation. Things like that were in her frame of mind. So that fear of seeking help is a big fear, which can keep people in a relationship for much longer. So this is a really big fear that many people have, especially when it comes to going to court, going to the police, things along those lines. People know that they might not be believed. So, as a whole, growing up in this relationship, there were just a lot of fears embedded around self expression, independence, self trust, emotional safety, and cycles of trauma. And it's just not only due to her abuser's actions, but also her past experiences, her family, social environment, just deepen everything. And up next, we have obligation. And based on Wednesday's experience, there were several obligations or perceived obligations that were keeping her subjugated to this relationship and to this abuser, and even as well in her family system. So, number one is family conditioning and people pleasing. So, from a young age, Wednesday learned that her emotional well being was secondary to others, especially her mother. She was blamed for her mother's feelings and conditioned to manage her mother's emotional needs, which led to chronic people pleasing and self blame. So she is always here feeling that with the people pleasing that she has an obligation to other people over herself. And number two, responsibility for others' emotions. This kind of ties into the first one, but in both her family and romantic relationships, Wednesday felt responsible for the happiness and emotional stability of those around her. And an example here, not her college professor, but the relationship that she had before, the boyfriend claimed that he'd take his own life if the relationship ended, which places an immense amount of emotional responsibility on Wednesday and an obligation to that person because they don't know what they will do. So it's an obligations for others' emotions and also well-being. And it is also a fear as well. When you think about it, she has a fear that that person's life will be over or taken and it will be placed on her. It's everything: obligation, guilt, shame, fear. And up next, we have childhood conditioning when it comes to her body. And Wednesday learned that her body didn't belong to her. She said it didn't belong to me, that it belonged to everybody else. And this really began the pattern of, feeling obligated or subjugated, that her own needs, her body, it was somebody else's. And up next, we have isolation and secrecy. And the abuser, the professor, insisted that Wednesday keep everything secret, further isolating her from support. And she complied because she believed she was protecting herself. She believed she was protecting him. And she believed that she was protecting the relationship. So she felt obligated to not talk about everything and not, just to keep everything a secret. That obligation was there, which keeps her isolated from people. And this was all done thinking that she was doing it out of obligation to herself, him, and the relationship as a whole. And the next one and the last one in our obligation list is financial and practical dependence. And when Wednesday lost her job and didn't have a lot of money, she was just more vulnerable and dependent on her abuser, which limited her options and made leaving feel impossible. So this is also partly, this can be a fear, but here she's being taken care of when these things have occurred where she's lost her job. So there's this obligation that she has to be a specific way and comply to things because these things are being done for her. So that's where the obligation comes in. And all of these obligations, whether explicitly stated by the abusers in her life or internalized over the years, really combine to keep Wednesday trapped in cycles of abuse and self-doubt. And breaking free really requires recognizing that these things are false and learning to reclaim your own agency in the aftermath of everything. And up next, we have guilt and shame. And number one here on our list is low self-esteem and feeling unlovable. And Wednesday describes never feeling genuinely loved, which started in childhood and continued after being criticized by her mother for her appearance, saying you're going to have a big nose when you grow up. If you ever want surgery, we can take care of that. And this left Wednesday believing that she wasn't worthy, she wasn't attractive, so she accepted crumbs of love and attention, and she had shame over this. And then there's family guilt. Her mother often blamed her for her own emotional distress, telling her things like, "Look at what you've done. You've made your mom cry. How dare you?" And at this point, Wednesday now believes that she is the one that is causing this. So there's a lot of, guilt going on that she is causing all of these things to her mom. And up next, we have blaming herself. So even after recognizing all of the logical reasons for how she'd become vulnerable to abuse, it's easier to blame yourself. So right here, there's like a lot of shame going on, blaming herself for what was going on in the relationship. And after that, we have difficulty trusting yourself. Wednesday now believes that she was the bad one in the relationship because he would always blame everything on me. So we have guilt and shame that was keeping her in the relationship and part of the control aspect of things. And going back to trying to make this relationship work and blaming herself if the relationship failed. She didn't want to fail like her parents had failed. So there was a lot of shame going on there that was keeping her in the relationship. And then on the list here, the last one on our list is after being gaslit for a while and blamed for everything for a while, she started to not really trust her own emotions and her own needs. So she felt guilty for speaking up, or the belief that she should speak up, that she wasn't worthy of those things. So that right there's like a guilt going on. The gaslighting really did a number on her to feel like asking for something or speaking up was not allowed, not right. And to do that made her feel guilt. It made also her feel shame as well. So a lot of the feelings of the guilt and shame that kept Wednesday subjugated were very much rooted in the early family dynamics where she was blamed and held responsible for others' behaviors and feelings. And then later on in the relationship, her abuser was able to take all of these things and really weaponize them to make Wednesday feel responsible for emotions, to really distrust her own instincts and really accept mistreatment as everything being her fault, and it really kept Wednesday subjugated for a long time. And when that happens, it's just really very difficult to break free and trust your own voice. So with all of those things being said, the fear, obligation, guilt, and shame, up next we have the 5 big insights that we want for Wednesday and the things that we want for you too. So here are the 5 takeaways from this episode. Number 1, trust your gut. Time and time again, Wednesday's instincts were warning her, and they were correct. And I want everyone to remember that Wednesday was right, but the abuser really did a great job to drown out those instincts, and they were a pro at it. But make no mistake, Wednesday was right. Her gut was right. It was just the abuser manipulated the rest of her to override those things. So going forward, just remember, a big takeaway for Wednesday and for everyone out there could be, your gut was right, and trust your gut. And I know people do not trust their gut after, but in a lot of instances, it has nothing to do with not trusting your gut. It's that the abuser really did a good job. Number 2 is saying no is okay. And Wednesday highlighted how important it is to work on boundaries, especially after being taught that you had to please others. So saying no is not only okay, it is a healthy thing. And 3 on our takeaways is it's not your fault. And despite how much self-blame Wednesday is working through or was working through, the reality is that Wednesday was groomed and manipulated. And abuse is never your fault. And healing starts with giving that blame back to the people who deserve it, who are the abusers. And number 4 is ask for support and validation. And Wednesday struggled with trusting herself, but she also reached out for help eventually and leaned on friends and family who understood her. Her dad was a big help. So keep doing things like that. And, connection is powerful. Being part of support groups is powerful. And number 5, growing out of old patterns. And Wednesday is doing the hard work of learning about boundaries, breaking the cycle of family trauma, and finding her true self beyond what others have told her to be. And just the first steps in trying to break these patterns is huge progress. Just showing up to the table to begin is a huge, huge step. And Wednesday should be proud of herself. If you're doing it right now, you should be proud of yourself. So growing out of old patterns is number 5. And goals and objectives for Wednesday that we have, and these might sound pretty familiar, like the stuff that we just said, but these are goals and objectives for Wednesday. Number 1 is rebuilding self-trust, and that goes for a lot of people out there. And one of the main challenges Wednesday expressed was a lack of trust in herself, stemming from years of manipulation and gaslighting. And an ongoing objective for her is to gradually rebuild self-trust, recognize her instincts, and learn to honor her own boundaries and perceptions. And number 2, a goal and an objective for Wednesday, and could be for you too, is healing from self-blame and shame. And throughout our talk, Wednesday repeatedly mentioned struggling with self-blame and feelings of shame for having been fooled. That was a big part, at the end. She had a lot of shame for being fooled or staying in a toxic situation. And, she was groomed in the way that she felt she was fooled. And the crucial goal for her to go forward is to shift away from that self-blame and acknowledge the responsibility for the abuse lies with the abuser and not herself. And I think that's a point everyone should hear and hammer home. And number 3 is setting and maintaining healthy boundaries. And Wednesday highlighted her need to work on her boundaries, which is vital after experiencing manipulation and coercion and practicing saying no, as we mentioned before, maintaining personal space and learning to recognize and enforce her own boundaries is an ongoing objective that we have for Wednesday. Could be for you too. And number 4, seeking safe support and validation, as we mentioned in the previous, 5 takeaways. Wednesday acknowledged trust issues and having a limited support system before she reached out. And an objective is to carefully build or rebuild a circle of safe, trustworthy individuals for emotional support and validation, whether that be friends, family, or support groups. And number 5 is processing and understanding the dynamics of abuse. And a big theme for Wednesday was, understanding the mechanics of abuse and how it played out in her relationship and her family. And a big objective is just to continue to educate yourself how these things work, how all of these cycles work. And, learning all of these things is empowering, and it is part of the healing process. And number 6 is breaking the cycle of family trauma. And Wednesday really expressed an intention to stop generational pattern of abuse that was going on, learning to recognize those behaviors and really striving to avoid repeating these cycles in her own life. And 7 was prioritizing mental health and self-care. And Wednesday really mentioned an ongoing depression. And she had that throughout her whole entire life and the impact of the trauma on her well-being. And she's aiming to prioritize, or we want her to prioritize, those activities, habits to support your mental health. And I think a lot of people out there, trying to focus on yourself and good habits is a really strong thing. And engaging in supportive communities is part of that as well. And number 8 for Wednesday, goals and objectives. We have down here for Wednesday just to be less harsh on herself and to accept herself and to recognize her strengths and to recognize the progress that she's made despite everything that has happened, and to talk to herself in a way that is compassionate and to give herself grace in everything. And that's kind of what we hope for Wednesday. And a lot of you out there, we hope those same things for you that are going through this right now. And those are our goals for Wednesday going forward, her objectives of everything that we have for her. And I hope that this follow-up episode really resonated with you. Wednesday's follow-up episode resonated with you and was helpful and could provide you with a little bit more clarity than just listening to the story. And we do also have a newsletter that goes along with this episode, as well as a free workbook. So if you want that workbook, you can sign up to our newsletter at our website or click on the link in the show notes for this episode, and we'll send you that workbook when we do our next newsletter to help you even further with your healing or getting out of the relationships that you're currently in. So with that being said, once again, I thank Wednesday for being our guest this week on our Survivor Story episodes, and I hope you have a good night.